All right, everybody, we're going to get started now. So it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Professor Marilyn A. Brown is a Brook Byers Professor of Sustainable Systems in the School of Public Policy at Georgia Tech, where she created and directs the Climate and Energy Policy Lab. Dr. Brown has previously held leadership positions at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, where she coordinated several multi-lab climate change mitigation studies, and she's also credited with the energy efficiency gap concept, for which she has developed methods to estimate and understand the gap as well. Since 2010, she's been a presidential appointee to the Board of Directors of the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA. This is the nation's largest public power provider. Her efforts have helped put the agency on track to reduce CO2 emissions in 2020 by 40% below its 2005 emissions. She's also authored more than 250 publications and 6 books, and she has many, many awards, which I will not list, but one of them is that she was a co-recipient of the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize for her contributions to the IPCC's fourth assessment report. And so with that, I'd like to welcome Marilyn to give her seminar.
Thank you, Alyssa. Right. It'll be all right. Okay, good. Thank you, Alyssa, and Benjamin Finkelor for inviting me to be here and participate in your seminar series. Before I get going, I'd like to also acknowledge that I have in the audience my cousin Titus Brown, who's an associate professor here in the Genomics Institute. Just, I think, in your second year, is that right? Already. And Tracy Teal, his wife. So I know a little bit about what Titus is doing because he has a blog which is labeled something like "From the Ivory Basement." And it's pretty entertaining if you should, stumble across it sometime. I think you'd enjoy that. He's a big data guy. And my family is all about science. We have academics and professors and corporate scientists and both sides of the family. So whenever I give talks, I do try, when students ask me about ways to ensure success in their careers, I always say, make sure that you're well-grounded in the sciences and mathematics, because you just really need them, I think, to compete effectively today. So Alyssa asked me to say a few things about my career, so I guess rather than starting with a photo, as was it Stephen Chu did when he began, I won't go back to baby pictures. But I'll tell you a little bit of my meanderings in the energy efficiency field, because it's a great way to talk about working on different themes, but adapting as the needs and conditions require. And it also says something about where I've been in my life. So I did, my first job was teaching at the University of Illinois, where I did a lot of sort of random control experiments and statistical work on what kinds of households and corporate customers participated in energy efficiency programs back in the 1970s. In the 70s, the motivation for energy efficiency was principally as a means to deal with the energy security situation emerging from the 1973-74 Arab oil embargo. So it was really a way to get off oil, reduce our energy requirements so that we no longer needed to import our energy resources. That theme continues, and the great thing about energy efficiency is that every year I've looked at it and worked in it, there's been at least one, if not multiple, motivations, and they tend not to go away. We still have the energy security issue. It's morphing, right? It's becoming also cybersecurity, and it's security in a much more complex energy setting with many more distributed resources, scattered and integrated into our grid, for instance. But then in the 1980s, I moved to Oak Ridge National Laboratory. There we were looking at clean energy options, trying to address the requirements of the Clean Air Act in 1990, which passed and set very rigid requirements for power production. And that was mostly the criteria air pollutants, NOx, SOx, particulate matters, more recently mercury, et cetera. So that's been a driver of energy efficiency because there's no cleaner kilowatt hour than the one you don't use, right? Then there have been other themes that have kept me active and excited about energy efficiency, but I suppose that most recently, when I moved up into management positions at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, I was organizing a lot of our work around climate change, climate mitigation, adaptation, even geoengineering. And that has persisted since the publication of some of the modeling work that I did that supported the Kyoto Protocol, called out by President Clinton, and the materials he used to sign the protocol. It didn't get ratified, as you know, but it was signed by the president. I went to Georgia Tech in part because I wanted to have a little bit more activity in the public policy arena. And at the national labs, while they do examine policy impacts and sometimes are tasked to look at the benefits and costs of alternative legislation or regulations, they don't have a full-bodied policy research program, in my opinion, at any of the labs. I'm not saying actually that universities do much better, but we do have the opportunity to examine whatever we want. And so there's a great deal of latitude at a university to examine policy options. And if you can get good funding to do that from NSF or wherever, you saw Brook Byers, endowed professor, you can examine what you want. So since coming to the Georgia Institute of Technology, I have focused on carbon mitigation, and so that's the first picture we show, right? Whoops. Already up there. All right, so now I'm going to segue into my talk. So I'm going to be talking about the role of distributed energy resources, which is putting energy efficiency into a slightly broader category. It is one of many resources we have that are distributed across space and can be activated at most any time of the day. It has a temporal and a spatial footprint to it. So you can kind of bundle them all together, all of these resources together, and then begin to differentiate the benefits and the costs and the pros and cons of working with any one of them. But my one climate change picture is here. We have experienced 15 of the warmest 16 years of climate temperatures across the globe this century. And the evidence that is linking it to anthropogenic activities is getting stronger. And of course, the evidence linking it to extreme climate events in this terrible hurricane season is also being reinforced by very good science. So not everyone's a believer, still a lot of skeptics, but it's becoming overwhelmingly and irrefutable. So turning to policies, we have in 2015 the world's nation states coming together to sign the Paris Accord. And despite the fact that we've heard that we may be attempting to remove the United States, we meaning the federal government, the administration, maybe trying to remove the United States as a signatory to it, the rules of the Paris Accord require at least 3 years, if not 4 years. 1 year, the first year, you can consider if you want to remove your country, and then if you decide to, it takes you 3 years. So I think that there is a pretty good chance that we're going to be talking about the Paris Accord for a very long time, and it'll be meaningful. But the analysis of the Paris Accord is it in and of itself, while it puts in place a very important mechanism, whereby countries can work together with adjustments every 3 years to their commitments and a backcast to whether or not they've met the prior commitments, and a whole system of structure to support the protocol, it is not sufficient. So this is an analysis from the World Energy Outlook of the International Energy Agency, and the top graph, the red one, is what current policies would do prior to the Paris Accord. The blue graph is what we get with the Paris Accord, and the green lines are those that are associated with meeting a 2 degrees C warming goal, 2 degrees C above pre-industrial temperatures by the end of the century. So here we have got to go much deeper. The dashed lines are the gigatons of carbon. So this is called the first pivot, the pivot that the Paris Accord gives us. Big pivot, but not enough. So now we begin to explore what needs to be done to drive emissions down to the 2 degrees C level. And this is an analysis, a special report by the International Energy Agency that shows the types of mitigation activities that would, in their opinion, be the least cost investments to try to reduce CO2 emissions further. And prominent in this second pivot is energy efficiency, right? Along with other investments like reducing inefficient coal, renewables, fossil fuel subsidy programs. We've got to get rid of those. Paying governments paying down costs of fossil-based fuels and electricity as a means of subsidizing their citizenry. So, once again, another accolade for the important role of energy efficiency. There's a lot of discussion these days within the United States that it would seem that the power sector is the most malleable or most responsive to price signals and policy interventions of all the sectors of the U.S. economy. I don't think that there's a similar theme across the world. I don't know, but certainly in my circles of experts, the power system is seen as the one we can bend down the quickest. And in fact, it's already happening. We've already seen a lot of transformation going on in the electricity sector over the past 5 years or so, and even seems to be accelerating. So over the past several years, we've created a system in which there are 14 million customers that are supplying power back into the grid, so users becoming providers or prosumers, if you will, consumers becoming suppliers. We have nearly 1% of our electricity now being generated by distributed solar, almost 1%. 80% of combined heat, there are now 80 gigawatts of combined heat and power. So if you put that into perspective, 14 gigawatts of solar and 80 gigawatts of combined heat and power in the industrial sector, to some extent in the commercial sector, is a really important low carbon option. It's not a no carbon option because it tends to be natural gas. So it's perhaps really one of those transition fuels and transition technologies. We have 16 million people participating in wholesale markets or in utility real-time pricing schemes. So they're adjusting their consumption to price signals that are offered by the utility system. And then we've got almost 500,000 electric vehicles that are being actively recharged in ways that help them to reduce their burden on the grid when there's congestion. It could also be an environmental signal that could be used to manipulate them. So I put this all together in a picture which is very cluttered, and I apologize, but I kept wanting to put more in, and I'm still not satisfied. I know we're missing a lot. I don't have my fleet of EVs. I don't have my electric delivery trucks. I don't have a lot in there. But the point I wanted to make with this drawing is that we used to have a big power plant, and we'd have that power being distributed and unidirectionally, metered only one way, and very simple, easy to manage. But now we have this system with a lot of distributed resources, and so the integration of this into a fully optimized and reliable, resilient system is quite a challenge. I'm going to talk about that. In the energy efficiency realm, we've known that consumers can be part of the solution. There are all kinds of ways in which sending signals, informing our consumers can make them use their energy much more wisely in a way that's good for the management of the grid. What we're also seeing is the emergence of these intermediaries and these informal non-utility aggregators that are coming together and performing functions. So those electric delivery trucks I wanted to show, they're probably feeding into a system operated by some sort of aggregator, not the utility company, a whole new business. You have new websites being developed. There's one that will tell you which gas company you should go and get the best deal for to reduce your bills. Just all kinds of IT-enabled business opportunities, some of which are really helping to make the grid a cleaner system. One of the projects that I've been working on has been, and I knew that I'd have with Alyssa here and Dan Sperling, if he were able to be here, would enjoy I can't remember his name. Gil Tan, yeah. Gil Tal, thanks. So you can distinguish the role of vehicles in three ways. Electric vehicles can be better managed by the grid. That's the recharging systems being optimized. So the grid to vehicle, in which case you might shave the peak, you might fill the valley, or you might provide negative demand response. Who's heard of negative demand response? You have. Nobody in any other state has heard of it, I don't think. All right, what is negative demand response? Okay, why?
Because there's low-cost power.
And negative prices.
Sure.
People paying you to use more. Okay, I mean, this is a new phenomenon. No such market existed a year or two ago because we didn't have many negative electricity prices, but now we do. So, you could charge at a time that was where you're paid to charge, right? Your electric vehicle. What a great opportunity. I'm sure there are companies now trying to aggregate that demand and offer it as a package into wholesale markets. Then there's the vehicle to customer. So this is where you have a storage capacity at some place. Maybe it's your home, but I didn't make this vehicle to home because it could be vehicle to office building, to campus lecture hall or whatever, where the vehicle's running some of these systems. So that's a traditional way. Demand charge reduction would occur as a result. But the most interesting part of this diagram, in my opinion, is the vehicle to grid, where now the cars are offering a service. They're helping to regulate the frequency of the electricity system, manage control voltage, add reserves where you're thin in reserves, or help as an emergency backup. This is only, by the way, 8 of 22 services that I've identified that distributed energy resources could be used to provide to the electric grid. So the question is, how much are these grid services worth? And how do you formulate a business to be able to aggregate those services and offer them so that the transaction costs don't overwhelm you? Because if you, as a single EV driver or owner of a Tesla power pack, want to do something, you by yourself aren't sufficient to move the market. So, speaking of power packs, we have the Tesla vision. We also have the Honda vision. Right over here, I understand. Much of this is already in play, although we're not sure that the power pack on the wall is in place. But you've got the solar system charging up the electric vehicle and optimized, I'm sure, in some way here in the Honda home as well. So how do we manage this integration process to make it as beneficial to consumers and the grid managers as possible? Well, we've got to work on the peak day problems. These peak day hours are changing. Resources need to be deployed into specific zones. The areas that need load reduction or enhancement are shifting. We've got to dispatch to address local constraints, and this all has to be managed in real time. So this is my great map, too. You got to see that. Knows New York. We're going to talk about Brooklyn, Queens. Anyone know New York? Manhattan, boroughs? All right. Trying to bring you some stories from outside California. When I'm on the East Coast hearing talks, it's all about California. So I figured maybe you like to have some diversity. What's happening is, well, I'll give you the story of Texas first. The Department of Energy just published a report. It's called the DOE Baseload Study. And in that, they have a diagram that I've used to derive this particular factoid. Oh, I'm good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, no, I don't. So fine, thank you. So the diagram I got this from, 25% solar in Texas, which they're not anywhere near yet. But if they were to be 25% solar, they've done this. ERCOT, which is the power organizer in Texas, has calculated that the on-peak capacity of solar drops to 5%. That is, once you've saturated the market with 25% solar, the peak of the system is now pushed off into the evening, and solar doesn't help you at all, right? So solar only gets you so far. And that's true with wind and all of the renewable intermittent resources. We have to pay attention to the hour of the day that they're peaking and what ultimately it does when there's significant saturation. Yeah.
Could you explain that again?
Yeah. Let me do the Queens Brooklyn story because you might be able to see it better with a couple of boroughs. So we have Manhattan. Right, here's Manhattan on the left. So this is at 2 p.m. in the middle of the day, and it's got a lot of consumption during the peak hour, 2 p.m. This is peak day loads by network. So now we go to Brooklyn and Queens during the day at 2. They're also consuming on the peak. I'm not going to answer your question. I'm going to have to go back to you with some more, but I'll keep going. So then at 9 p.m., we have Manhattan emptied out, and everyone's now in Brooklyn and Queens. And now we have a new peak being created at 9 p.m. in the evening. That's not really the solar story. The solar story is if you have a lot of solar in Texas, then what used to be your peak hour from 2 to 7 p.m. is being met by solar. So now your new peak is shifted to the evening when solar is no longer available. Now, it used to be, we talked about this big ramp rate toward the end of the afternoon, where all you have to do is get through that ramp rate and move on to something else. But now it's almost a gap. That ramp challenge is being exacerbated with high penetration of solar because the peak is now so far into the evening. And so the statistic was only 5% of that new peak at 9 p.m. in the evening can be met by solar. Well, not even that at 9, I wouldn't think. Maybe on the summer equinox. So the on-peak solar capacity, the percent of the capacity of the system that's generating electricity at that peak hour at 9 p.m. is only 5%. So now you've got to look at other resources. So as we turn to try to figure out how to integrate all these resources together, it seems to me we have kind of two competing approaches. One approach would be to strengthen and repair the systems we have. Make sure that what we've got is operating and is resuscitated and is bigger and stronger. And the other approach is to incorporate smart technologies and these distributed energy assets. Of course, you can do some combination, but we have proponents of each that are battling one another. You have the proponents for, let's figure out how to keep coal, keep nuclear, build more natural gas. We know how to do that, known commodity. And then we have the others who say, well, let's just go ahead and pull in more renewables and more distributed resources, including energy efficiency. So they turn to diagrams like this. So the one measurement of cost effectiveness that's probably the standard in the industry. If you have to have a single metric of what should I purchase when I have to expand my supply of electricity, you turn to a diagram like this, which is from a National Academy's report called The Power of Change. And it's using data from a year ago, so it's a little bit dated. It's a very rapidly changing field, but it's not too far off. What you would turn to is natural gas, right? Because it is the cheapest resource. Natural gas combined cycle plant. Solar, wind are now cheaper than nuclear. Biomass is no longer particularly cheap, biomass power. The options are all kind of narrowing in on that natural gas choice. This report, by the way, barely even talks about energy efficiency. And when you use levelized costs of electricity measures, it's just as easy to apply them to the cost of power generation as to the cost of energy efficiency. The megawatt hour I don't use has the same kind of costs. And you should be able to, in fact, put your energy efficiency right there on the same chart as everything else, which is what I do in my publications. We'll come back to that in a minute. So there's this changing narratives about jobs. As you know, we've had a lot of focus on trying to sustain our mining, our coal mining industry. Coal miners are dragged into press conferences and pitch their themselves as the future. There are only 60,000 coal miners in the country. 75,000, excuse me, maybe 60 now, I'm not sure. Say 75,000. And that's in large part because of the automation that's taken place in the coal mining industry. If you go to the Powder River Basin, you've got a guy operating autonomously all of this big coal mining apparatus, trucks. Take a look at the numbers about energy efficiency jobs, and it's overwhelming. We have nearly 1 million U.S. workers spending a majority of their time installing high-efficiency appliances and installing high-efficiency insulation, windows, lighting. It's a much bigger part of our enterprise. So how much energy efficiency should a utility buy? Going back to that diagram of the levelized cost of electricity, you put efficiency there. Typically almost always goes below the line. You get paid. It's the it's the lunch you get paid to eat. Amory Lovin's saying, because you're saving so much money that within a very quick return, you get your money back, even though it does cost you more to buy an efficient light bulb or whatever. So at the Tennessee Valley Authority, I had an opportunity to put in place a system for deciding how much energy efficiency to purchase. Most of the vertically regulated electric companies in the country, including, for instance, Southern Company, Dominion, TVA, what they've been doing for deciding on their energy efficiency investments is that they have extremely sophisticated, very expensive modeling tools for deciding how much to invest in different parts of their system. But in terms of the magnitude of demand to meet, what they do is they do a study. What's the energy efficiency potential? And they may say the potential is to reduce our demand by 0.5%. So they take the growth trajectory and they bend it down by 0.5%, and then they apply this multi-million-dollar modeling effort to figure out, okay, what are we going to do to meet that new demand, right? But the estimate of the demand was not integrated with the decisions about how to meet that demand. So what we did was to fix that problem at TVA. We created an energy efficiency power plant. And we populated it with all kinds of attributes. And it costs you so much. There's a certain risk, a capacity factor. It delivers at particular hours of the day. All of the variables that you would attribute to a conventional power plant, you can characterize in terms of an energy efficiency plant. And in our last integrated resource plan, which was published in 2015, we were able to document the important role of energy efficiency investments going forward, because now we had done, they competed efficiency head to head against a new gas plant, against solar or any other option. My last topic is how we're going to try to move markets more rapidly to get that second pivot, or like complete the first pivot and keep on going. The most likely U.S. policy choice for debate these days is going to be a carbon tax. We had one proposed by a set of old guard Republicans, including James Baker. In February of 2017, he proposed a carbon dividends plan. So the carbon dividends plan would put a tax of $40, I think it was up to $40 on a ton of CO2, and the revenues that would be collected from that tax would be distributed back to households. So it was considered a revenue neutral policy because the government is not getting bigger, fatter. You know, we're not spending all those taxes on the government's favorite programs. It's all going back to the households. So, yeah, sounds great, right? What could be wrong with that? So I haven't seen much analysis done of the implications, in particular equity considerations. As you may know and might imagine, the carbon tax is always seen as having equity issues because low-income households, for instance, spend a much higher proportion of their income on energy. So in the U.S., it's something like, on average, 3.2% of your average citizen household income goes to energy in the home. But for the low-income household, the average is something like 7.2%. In Atlanta, it's a couple percentages higher than that. And throughout the Southeast, it's very high. That's another story for another time. But anyway, so when you raise rates through carbon taxes, what would happen, then the people who are paying the highest percentage of their income on energy suffer the most. So you've got to figure out a way around that. When you implement a carbon tax, it means that the utilities are going to have to pay more for their coal, their natural gas, anything fossil oil. And then because they're paying more, they're passing higher prices back to their customers. Now, eventually, it'll be more profitable for them to just retire the coal plant, right, and build a new wind farm. But then that will also be costly. And so that extra cost would go back to the households or back to all consumers across all of the consumer classes. So the question I had was not really about equity in terms of different kinds of income classes, but was regional and geographic equity. Again, bringing my East Coast lenses here, in particular, having spent a lot of my life now in the South, how would the South fare compared to, say, California? Well, what do you think? So let's let you spend a minute and think about what the regional implications, and I'll tell you what my modeling says. So you're adding, you're taxing fossil fuels by their CO2 content. You're bringing all that money to the Department of the Treasury, and then you're dispersing it back on a per capita basis back across the country. What do you think? Who are the winners and losers? Yeah, all the way back. Do you think that would be true in Georgia? No, the rates in no, we've got very low rates, very low. Yeah, very affordable. Yeah. There have been studies of the carbon dividends plan that have said overall that citizens would get back an amount comparable to the extra they would pay for the electricity. Yeah, on a national basis. Yeah. Well, we can talk about that. I believe it would be. Yeah.
I want to venture a guess that the Appalachian, Southern, and Midwestern states
So how does that work?
Using electricity.
How's that work? I mean, yeah, yes.
So there's a lot of coal assets or
Yeah.
resources in the Midwest and Appalachia and the South that are used much more heavily relative to, say, Western states that are much more natural gas and hydroelectric.
Yeah, so just spinning that out in case the logic is not clear. Therefore,
Yeah, the more carbon intensive your electricity system, the more coal intensity you are, the more you pay. Everybody gets back the same amount.
right. So, the revenues are going to come from the carbon-intensive systems, but they'll be distributed to, the proposal was very clear, everyone equally. Well, that represents a transfer of wealth from carbon-intensive regions to other regions. No,
Wouldn't that introduce an incentive then for the
you don't have to do it that way, though. So you can get that same incentive and not have the transfer of wealth, right? So my proposal is that you return these resources back on a per CO2 basis to households, right? The households can spend their money however they want. The utilities are still being incentivized they're still paying a lot for coal and gas, but the households are going to get more revenue returned if they're in a region where their CO2-based taxes have been very high. So there'll be a match. We need to match. In fact, it shouldn't be done at the level that of my analysis. It should be done at a more discrete level. So what I've looked at is I've used the National Energy Modeling System, my favorite modeling tool, the principal tool that is used by the Energy Information Administration to forecast prices and characterize the state of the energy system in the U.S. General equilibrium, computational general equilibrium model. And we have it up and running at Georgia Tech. So we should call it the GT NIMS, I'm told. Once we've changed it, it's our model. So we change it in various ways to reflect our beliefs about policies worth evaluating. And then we do offline calculations of the results. So we run the model, which gets a least cost solution. That's the driving optimization goal for NIMS, least cost. You get your results and you push them off into Excel spreadsheets and examine what the implications are. So we calculate what we call the policy cost of this carbon tax. The policy cost of the carbon tax is how much more the utilities are going to have to pay in fuel resources, in their capital investments in power plants and upgrading and shifting and all of the utility resource costs. We calculate the amount that people are spending on energy efficiency, because of course near and dear to my heart. We itemize the energy efficiency premium. You're paying a little more every time you go with efficiency for the extra cost of it. And then you subtract from that the carbon tax revenue because it's being cycled back. And the question is, if you tally up all those things, the utilities costs, the consumers costs with new rates and investment in efficiency, and then the carbon tax, what is the outcome? So we've done this for, and if you want more detail, we do have one publication. It doesn't examine the tax, but the methodology used. It focuses on the Clean Power Plan. Which, I'm no longer doing research on, since it is, I think, moribund. But anyway, the methodology is the same. So there are 22 regions that the United States uses they're called the NERC, North American Electricity Reliable Corporations regions that they use in planning. So we have them arrayed, those 22 regions are arrayed around this spider diagram. At the top, we have the Mississippi Basin region. It has the highest intensity of coal. And then you move down clockwise to declining intensities of coal. And what I'm illustrating is the policy cost per capita in the year 2030. And it could do this in many ways. We look at cumulative costs for every ton of carbon reduced, but here it's 2030 costs to each person in the 22 regions. And the four scenarios that I'm showing here are $10 tax with per capita recycling, that's the blue, a $10 tax with a big energy efficiency program and per capita recycling. So add efficiency and you have a dash line. The solid green is a $10 tax with per emission recycling. So you get back as many of the tax dollars as your region had sent to Washington. And then you add efficiency and you get the dashed green line with the per emissions recycling. Well, first of all, you see that when you go with a per emission recycling, the solid green line, you can see a generally more equitable per capita distribution across the 22 regions, right? Which is almost by definition each region. And it's almost settling on the zero line because we can do a $10 tax at actually a slight net gain of it's essentially zero, according to the National Energy Modeling System, because you're anticipating a different price signal. You start making adjustments now. When the tax is up and running in the year 2020, the utilities are prepared, and there is essentially no net cost. You add energy efficiency, and you gain a return. The policy cost becomes negative because you're eliminating barriers to energy efficiency, and energy efficiency pays for itself. So the energy efficiency policy costs are negative. But they wobble because it depends on what region you're in. So the wobbly green line has the efficiency impacts, which these are a whole array of 12 different energy efficiency programs that we model within the National Energy Modeling System. So then you get some variability, but not the same level of variability as this blue spiky set of lines, which are the policy when you return just based on population and not referring to the carbon content. So we've got ranges across the regions of 150 per capita cost to 250 per capita benefit. Anyway, just some of the research that I have fun doing with my students at Georgia Tech. Thank you, Yufei Li and Kyungwon Kim, if you're listening. Conclusion here, the clean power transformation can grow the economy, create new high-tech jobs, particularly in these areas of intermediators and aggregators, distributed resources, improve human health, and protect the planet. My analysis, I do talk about the values of the environmental pollution that's averted, but they're not in mine's a financial analysis. It's what you're getting paid right now to do as a utility company, or you add the social cost of carbon or the cost of SOx, NOx, et cetera, it all becomes much better, right? A great deal is at stake, and as I've shown, policy design really matters. Blending engineering and science and economics, social science and modeling, big data and policy analysis can help also to reveal new possibilities. So keep up the good work. We need the Energy and Efficiency Institute's students to help us in this next transformation. Thank you.
valuing energy efficiency,
Yeah.
I was wondering how you went about valuing energy efficiency, the fact that there's a free rider problem. You know, it makes sense for customers to invest in their own needs. So, I know that some electric utilities are sort of more resistant to funding energy efficiency programs.
Have you heard about the free driver influence? Free driver? What do you think that is? Anyone? Free driver? Can you define free rider, please?
Yeah, that's essentially you're paying somebody to do something that they would have done already. So if I want to, replace all my light bulbs with energy efficient light bulbs because it'll save me money, but then I go online and find like a rebate program, then just to save more money, I'll do it anyway. But I'm free riding by taking some money that I would.
Anybody know what free drivers are?
I guess I'm going to take a stab at it. It might be the inverse of that, where a utility might already be benefiting from
Oh,
efficiency
okay.
investments
All right.
without actually compensating them.
Okay. No, but that's a great idea. Yeah.
What about maybe
Yeah, so another term for free drivers is market transformation. PG&E runs a program, or maybe the National Weatherization Program from the Department of Energy requires that every home that it weatherizes be given a high-efficiency gas furnace. This happened in Wisconsin, for instance. So they weatherize about 2% of the low-income population a year in Wisconsin, right? And what happened over time is that because they required high-efficiency gas furnaces, not just code, but over code, the whole Wisconsin marketplace changed, and providers only installed the kinds of furnaces that the Department of Energy helped them install in those couple percentage a year. But why would you keep the old in the new? Once you've had to meet the high-end efficiency requirements, then you push it on everyone. That's a market driver. So I would say you have to show me that free riders are not more influential than free drivers. The drivers are those who are benefiting from the program that caused the market to transform, that brought us, whatever, high-efficiency lighting. Yeah.
Question, it's kind of related to
But there are no free riders in the modeling that I use. But we do have. There are all kinds of other very sophisticated behavioral parameters in it, including a take-back effect, and you have discount rates and price elasticities of demand, that sort of thing. But there's no free riders. You have to put that in when you characterize the policy. I think it would have to be done in a different way, which I didn't do. Yeah.
slightly related to that, in that how do you handle split incentives for people who rent properties, right? As a renter, I'm not going to replace my water heater. There's no incentive to make a big investment in the property. Whereas the property owner probably won't do it because they're not the one paying the utility bill for the hot water. Right? They're not paying the gas bill. They don't care.
That's when you regulate. You get those worst water heaters out of the system. No more can be purchased in the United States. That's what we've done with refrigerators. That's the best solution, I think, to the market, the market failure of principals making decisions, principals making decisions for agents, or principal-agent problem. Yeah, where your tenant. Landlord problem, landlord-tenant problem is a specific example, yeah. Or buying, someone that buys cars for a fleet that they then pass along to the fleet owner when they don't operate them. Same problems.
Slide for the national model for the emissions tax. It seemed like energy efficiency, the supply curve, data input to that
Yeah.
model, and also for the TVA sort of virtual power plants. I was hoping you could talk about how did you develop that energy efficiency supply curve? What's under $10 a ton that we're not doing already?
Yeah.
And why not?
So my book, Green Savings, which was published in 2015, has a lot of data on the energy efficiency supply curves. You know, that's a concept that Alan Meyer coined and generated and developed. I developed the concept of the energy policy supply curve. So you have, instead of looking at each of the individual technologies, you ask if you have better building codes or an incentive program that might cross over multiple technologies. What kind of savings would it generate at what cost? So I'm going more on the sort of policy. What are the policies that work as opposed to which technologies have we overlooked? So let me answer along the policy line, if I could. It's a long conversation for the technologies. But, you know, having worked for 22 years at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, which helped develop heat pump technologies. Heat pumps were always one of my big answers. The rooftop integrated triple effect heat pump where you get heating, cooling, air conditioning, ventilation, a SEER, coefficient of performance of 7. That's above 100%. That's 700%. You can get because you're taking all of this out of the air. You know, those are really hot in my book of what to do that we're not doing enough of. And there are 2 of them on the marketplace, Weathermaster and the Rebel by Daikin. So take a look at those. But
Thinking in your model then of some fuel switching, like from natural gas heating to
yeah,
electric.
yeah.
Like how does that?
So, you know, what I did in my model, I actually hardwired those technologies in. I said, assume we have the kinds of codes and standards that make more of those required. I didn't actually hardwire those that extreme, but that's how I would do it. And yeah. But on the policy front, some of my favorite policies. So the lib response to your principal, the tenant landlord question, which was to regulate. In all of my analysis, it's the regulations that are the most cost-effective of the policies. And after that, it's information. And the third is financial incentives. They tend to be so difficult to do cost-effectively. It's just, and it costs the agency a lot because there's an incentive involved. And then there are the administrative costs of overseeing it. And so I do have some of that in our models, but not a lot. Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit more about
Well, tax rebates and incentives are so easy to model because it's very explicit that suddenly becomes less costly and you socialize the costs across everyone else. So it's easy to see that tax rebates can be done well or not. I don't have a strong go or no-go kind of view of those. And we do need more financialization of energy efficiency, especially among people who can't afford it. But I like to see those kind of incentives being picked up by utilities through on-bill financing. So the utility will finance the upgrade for the customer, and the customer, instead of having lower bills, pays the same bill, and the utility gets paid back. I like that model. But there are many ways. Different countries have different specialties and have done tax rebates well or not. Yeah. Do you have a view? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we've seen that in electric vehicle rebates, for instance, all across the country where states have them and then they don't, and the market collapses. I know it does. I mean, the worst thing is that the on-again, off-again nature of some of these incentives, of the production tax credit being the most offending on-again, off-again for wind and solar, where the industry would every other year die because the production tax credit was pulled away. So that's not a way to run. So we have a pretty good appliance standard-setting organization at the Department of Energy now. It's not as good as what they do in Japan, which is a model I particularly like. They've got this top runner program. So they, every time there's a new model on the market that's more efficient, that can be shown to be cost-effective, it becomes the new standard for sales in the future. Now you do a notice of proposed rulemaking, and you give the industry a year to respond, and then you give the government another year to reflect, and then another year to figure out what to do next. And by the time you've put the standard in place, it's talking about performance, 3 years ago. So I don't like the fact that it's so slow in the U.S. It's our democratic process, which I appreciate, but I think we could speed it up or move to something like the top runner where the rules are very clear. If there's a company that has a better product and you can show through a system of standard calculations that it is, then just adopt it. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate all the good questions. Good luck.